Have you ever woken up one morning and realized your life was no longer your own? That the choices you thought were permanent had slipped through your fingers, leaving nothing but fragments? I asked myself that question every night as I lay staring at the ceiling, wondering how a woman like me, 47 years old, mother, wife, employee, had ended up broken and uncertain of tomorrow. My name is Monica Harper, and I live in Birmingham, Alabama. For most of my life, I believed I had done everything right. I married young, raised 2 children, and worked steadily in the administrative office of a mid-sized healthcare company. My life was never glamorous, but it was steady, predictable, safe. At least, that's what I thought. It started with the silences. My husband, David, once talked endlessly about his work, his favorite football team, the new recipes he wanted us to try on weekends. But over the years, his voice grew quieter. He stayed late at the office more often, scrolling through his phone during dinners, his smile fading from something warm to something perfunctory. I convinced myself it was stress, that he just needed time. The night he told me he wanted a divorce, the world split open. We were sitting in the living room, the television murmuring in the background. I noticed his hands trembling as he held the remote. Finally, he turned to me and said the words that would change everything. "Monica, I can't do this anymore." At first, I didn't understand. Couldn't do what? Watch TV? Sit in silence? Then it hit me like a tidal wave. Our marriage. Our life. Me, I've met someone, he admitted, voice low, almost ashamed. The words hollowed me out. 23 years together, and it ended with those 3 words. He had already packed a bag, already planned his exit. I didn't scream, I didn't throw anything. I just sat there, numb, as he walked out the door. The sound of it closing behind him felt final. Like the last nail sealing a coffin. If divorce was a wound, losing my job months later was salt poured directly into it. I had worked at the healthcare company for over a decade. I knew the rhythm of the office like I knew the rhythm of my own breathing. But when budget cuts came, loyalty didn't matter. I was called into the manager's office, handed a severance packet, and thanked for my years of service. Just like that, the ground shifted again. At 47, suddenly single and unemployed, I found myself staring at bills with no steady income. Panic clawed at me in the quiet hours of the night. How would I survive? What future was left for me? My children, both in their 20s, had already flown the nest. They called me, checked in, offered words of encouragement, but they had their own lives in different states. I didn't want to burden them with my unraveling. So, I lied. I told them I was fine. I told them I was figuring things out. In reality, I was drowning in silence. Days blurred together. I'd wake late, make coffee I barely drank, and scroll endlessly through job postings, my chest tightening with every minimum 5 years experience or preferred under 40. It was as if the world had moved on, leaving me behind. Sleep abandoned me. Nights stretched long and heavy, my mind replaying every mistake, every choice that had led me here. I replayed the last years with David, wondering what I could have done differently. Was it my fault he left? Had I failed as a wife, as a partner, as a woman? The mirror became my enemy. Each time I caught my reflection, I saw someone older than her years, with lines etched by worry and eyes dulled by grief. I avoided social gatherings, ignored friends' texts, and sank deeper into isolation. Birmingham had never felt so small. I'd drive past familiar streets, the grocery store where David and I used to shop, the park where we had once watched our kids play. Every corner whispered memories, taunting me with the life I had lost. That there's a peculiar kind of emptiness that comes when everything familiar is stripped away. My home, once a place of warmth, felt like a museum of a life I no longer belonged to. David's things were gone, but the ghost of him lingered everywhere. His empty closet, his favorite chair, even the faint smell of his cologne on the couch cushions, it all pressed down on me. I thought about selling the house. But the thought of leaving felt like another death. I was stuck, suspended between a past I couldn't return to and a future I couldn't yet imagine. Every night, as I lay in the silence, the questions grew louder. Who am I without him? Who am I without my job? What worth does a woman like me have now? It all came to a head one rainy afternoon. I was sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by unopened bills, the weight of failure pressing so heavily on my chest that I could barely breathe. My phone buzzed with a text from my daughter. "Love you, Mom. Don't forget you're stronger than you think. Stronger? I laughed bitterly. I felt anything but strong, but as I stared at her message, something cracked open inside me. Maybe she saw something I didn't. Maybe strength wasn't about holding everything together perfectly. Maybe it was about standing up, even when you're broken, and choosing not to give up. For the first time in months, I asked myself not what I had lost, but what I could still build. The days after that breaking point still felt heavy, but something inside me had shifted. I couldn't keep sitting in silence, waiting for life to hand me answers. I had to find them myself. One evening, while scrolling aimlessly through the internet, I stumbled across an article written by a woman about her life after divorce. She wasn't a celebrity, just an ordinary person, yet her words resonated with me so deeply that I felt as though she was speaking directly to my pain. I read every line, tears streaming down my face, realizing that if her story could touch me, maybe my story could reach someone else. I opened an old laptop that had been gathering dust and created a blank document. At first, my fingers hovered over the keys, hesitant. What did I have to say that mattered? But then the words began to spill. I wrote about the silence of my house, about the way grief comes in waves, about the fear of starting over when you feel too old and too tired. I wrote honestly, without filters, as though I were talking to another woman who needed to hear she wasn't alone. By the time I stopped, the sun had set, and the screen was filled with paragraphs that felt like pieces of my soul. I created a simple blog, nothing fancy, and uploaded the post. I didn't expect anyone to read it. But the next morning, when I checked, there were a handful of comments from women, some older, some younger, thanking me for my honesty. One wrote, "You said everything I've been feeling but couldn't put into words." My heart raced as I read their messages. For the first time in months, I felt connected to the world again, encouraged. I wrote another post, then another. I began to share small parts of myself, stories of sleepless nights, of cooking meals for one, of trying to apply for jobs and being told I was overqualified. Slowly, my blog found its audience, women like me, women who had been left behind, who were searching for purpose in middle age. They left comments, emailed me, and even asked for advice. The more I shared, the more I realized I wasn't just healing myself, I was helping others heal too. Writing became my lifeline. Each post was like breathing again, pulling me out of the suffocating darkness. I started writing every day, sometimes late into the night. It didn't matter if it was polished or perfect. It mattered that it was true. And in telling my truth, I gave other women permission to tell theirs, but it wasn't just writing. I knew I had to take care of my body and mind if I wanted to keep moving forward. I joined a local community yoga class, where I felt clumsy and awkward at first. My body didn't bend the way it used to, and my balance was shaky. But each time I left class, I felt lighter, calmer. The breathing exercises helped quiet the noise in my head, and the gentle encouragement of the instructor made me believe I was capable of more than I thought. Meditation followed, something I never imagined I'd try. Sitting in silence with my thoughts had always been terrifying, but gradually, I learned to let them pass instead of fighting them. I would light a candle, close my eyes, and breathe until the tightness in my chest eased. Some days I cried during those sessions, but even that felt like a release I desperately needed. At the community center, I also discovered a women's support group. The first night, I almost turned around in the parking lot, too scared to walk in. But when I finally stepped through the door, I found a circle of women whose eyes mirrored my own pain. We introduced ourselves, shared snippets of our stories, and before long, I realized that while our details were different, our struggles were the same. Loneliness, fear, regret, the search for self-worth, they wove through all of us. That circle became my anchor. Week after week, I listened, spoke, cried, and laughed, finding a sisterhood I hadn't known I needed. As the blog grew, something unexpected began to happen. Women started emailing me not just to share their own stories, but to ask for guidance. How did you handle the divorce paperwork? How do you cope with the quiet nights? How did you find the courage to start again? At first, I hesitated. Who was I to give advice? But as I typed out thoughtful responses, I realized I had something valuable to offer, lived experience. I wasn't speaking from theory or textbooks. I was speaking from the trenches of pain and resilience. One woman wrote back after my advice and said, "Monica, you should do this professionally. Women like us need voices like yours." I laughed at the idea, but the seed was planted. Over time, that seed grew into a possibility I couldn't ignore. Could I turn my writing and my experience into something more? I began researching online consulting. At first, it felt overwhelming: websites, scheduling platforms, payment systems, but I took it one step at a time. I created a simple page offering one-on-one conversations for women going through midlife transitions, divorce, career changes, loneliness. I called it Second Chances with Monica. It felt bold, almost presumptuous, but when the first woman booked a session, my nerves gave way to determination. During that first consultation, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, heart racing. The woman on the other side of the screen was in tears, confessing she felt invisible since turning 50. I listened, really listened, and when I spoke, I shared what had worked for me: writing, community, small steps toward reclaiming joy. By the end of the call, she was smiling through her tears, thanking me for giving her hope. When I closed my laptop, I sat in stunned silence, realizing I had just stepped into something entirely new. The blog and consulting didn't solve everything overnight. I was still rebuilding, still navigating uncertainty. But they gave me purpose, something to wake up for each morning. They reminded me that even in brokenness, there is value, and that sometimes the very wounds we try to hide can become the bridges that connect us to others. And so, slowly, quietly, I began to rise again. The day I realized I was no longer afraid of the future came quietly, almost without my noticing. I woke early, made coffee, and instead of sitting at the kitchen table staring at the empty chair across from me, I carried my mug to the porch and watched the sunrise. The sky was streaked with shades of orange and gold, and for the first time in years, I felt gratitude rather than grief when a new day began. The blog had grown far beyond anything I imagined. What started as a place to pour my sorrow had become a gathering space for women across the country. They wrote to me from small towns in Montana, bustling cities in California, quiet neighborhoods in the Midwest. They shared their struggles: divorces, layoffs, loneliness, the crushing fear that midlife was the end of the road. And in their words, I saw reflections of my own story. Each time I responded, each time I wrote another post, I felt that my pain had been given purpose. It was no longer just mine to carry. It was a bridge that connected me to them. The consulting sessions followed their own rhythm. At first, it was only a handful of women booking time with me, but word spread in ways I hadn't expected. A woman from Chicago recommended me to her sister in Florida. Another shared my name in a private Facebook group for divorced women. Soon, my calendar began to fill. I found myself guiding women through practical steps like updating resumes, preparing for interviews, and handling financial stress. But more often, the conversations turned to something deeper: rebuilding confidence, finding joy, learning to believe that they still mattered. I never pretended to have all the answers. Sometimes I simply listened, letting them speak into the silence until their own words revealed the truths they had been too afraid to face. Other times, I shared pieces of my story: my nights of crying, my mornings of doubt, my slow rediscovery of myself. And when I saw their eyes brighten, even through a screen, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. Financially, it wasn't perfect at first. The consulting brought in small amounts, the blog occasionally earned a little through ads and donations, but it was not stability in the way a 9-to-5 job had been. Yet, somehow, that instability no longer terrified me. For so long, I had equated security with staying in jobs or relationships that suffocated me. Now, freedom felt more valuable than certainty. Each dollar I earned from my own work carried pride, not just relief. The community I built extended beyond the screen. A few local women who had followed my blog reached out, asking if we could meet in person. Nervously, I agreed, and one Saturday afternoon we gathered at a coffee shop downtown. We sat around a wooden table, strangers who felt like old friends, laughing, crying, sharing stories without fear of judgment. By the end of the afternoon, we decided to make it a regular thing. Once a month, we met, sometimes at a park, sometimes in someone's home. Those gatherings became lifelines, not only for them but for me. The changes seeped into every corner of my life. My house no longer felt like a tomb of memories. I redecorated slowly, new curtains in the living room, a fresh coat of paint in the kitchen, small plants on the windowsill. Each change was symbolic, a quiet declaration that this was my space now, shaped by my hands, filled with my choices. I even created a small corner office where I could write and hold my online sessions. It was nothing extravagant, just a desk, a comfortable chair, and a pinboard covered with notes and encouraging messages from women who had found hope through my words. There were still setbacks. Some days, grief returned like a wave crashing against the shore. On anniversaries, the emptiness of David's absence felt unbearable, and I let myself weep. But I no longer saw those tears as weakness. They were reminders of love, proof that I had lived fully, that I had been brave enough to give my heart away. And just as the waves came, they receded, leaving space again for peace. What surprised me most was how much younger women began to follow me. At first, I thought my writing would resonate only with women my age or older. But 20-somethings wrote to me, saying they feared becoming invisible by the time they reached midlife. They thanked me for showing that life didn't end at 47, that reinvention was always possible. I hadn't set out to become a role model, but somehow, my brokenness had become a roadmap for others. In time, I learned to celebrate small victories. The first time one of my clients called to say she had landed a new job, I cheered out loud, alone in my kitchen. When another woman told me she had finally left an abusive relationship after years of fear, I cried with her. Their wins felt like my wins, each one proof that resilience was contagious. My children noticed the change in me, too. During one visit, my son looked around the house and said, "Mom, you seem different. Happier." I smiled, realizing he was right. I was no longer pretending for their sake. I was genuinely happier, even with all the uncertainty, even with the scars that hadn't fully healed. One evening, after a long day of writing and consultations, I sat at my desk and opened a blank page. Instead of writing a blog post, I wrote to myself, "You are not defined by what you lost. You are defined by what you built from the rubble." I pinned that page to the board above my desk, where I could see it every day. It became my compass. I began dreaming again, something I hadn't done in years. Not of going back to the life I'd lost, but of building a future that was truly mine. I thought about writing a book, compiling the stories of the women I had worked with, showing the world that midlife is not an ending but a threshold. I thought about expanding my consulting into workshops, maybe even retreats where women could come together in person to heal and grow. For the first time since my marriage ended, my dreams felt alive, not foolish. Sometimes, late at night, I still sat in silence, the weight of everything I had endured pressing against me. But instead of despair, I felt gratitude. Gratitude for the pain that forced me to change. Gratitude for the strangers who became sisters. Gratitude for the resilience I never knew I had. At 47, when everything fell apart, I thought my story was ending. But standing there now, with a pen in one hand and hope in the other, I understood something profound. My story was just beginning.